Rabbit, and welcome to another weekend edition of the Pagan Perspective. This week's question is really three questions, but they're related. And so let me answer the first one first, and then I'll proceed on to the next two. First question from Red Dragon 033195. It has been brought to my attention that some people believe that calling themselves pagan is an insult to the gods and their ancestors, because it's a propaganda word adopted from the Latin word paganus, country dweller. Do you feel as if the title pagan is an insult to the gods and non-Christian ancestors, or does it matter to you? I think really all of the questions this week have to do with word meanings and word usages. And in my estimation, words are symbols. They're sounds, they're symbolic representations when we write them down on paper, but they're symbols for things. I think that words have a cluster of meanings, and those meanings change and shift, and different people adopt different of them in conversation. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you're talking to somebody, it's really important to have a clear understanding of what they mean by the word they use, and that they know what you mean. Otherwise, you're quite likely to misunderstand each other. Okay, back to the question. I suppose nearly 2,000 years ago, maybe 1,700 and something years ago, probably the word paganus might have been used as a put-down word. We're the intellectual, modern city dwellers who've adopted the new faith, and you out in the country are just hicks, bumpkins, hayseeds, old-fashioned, out-of-date pagans. So I suppose it might have been, I don't know, it may also have just been a descriptive word that these were country people, and it wasn't particularly a put-down, it was just a description of who they were. But if you look at other religious movements, for example the Methodists, I grew up Methodist, so I'm supposed to know about this. Originally the word Methodist was a slang word that sort of meant fanatic, or someone who was obsessive, compulsive about their religious practice. And if you look at some of the earliest writings of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, you can see he was pretty OCDC about the whole religion thing. He did lighten up later, and over the years his followers have lightened up a lot. But it was originally a put-down, and it's now on the official title of the denomination, and it's on the church buildings. I think the same thing could be said maybe about the Mormons, that was originally a label that was stuck on them, and since it's stuck, they've owned it. So I don't see anything particularly insulting about the term pagan. I refer to myself as a pagan or a neo-pagan, since I don't practice authentically the religion of my pre-Christian ancestors, because it's really difficult to figure out what that was. And even if you figure out what it was and you try to practice it, I'm not totally sure that it's appropriate for the 21st century. So I don't think it's an insult. I really don't think that the gods and goddesses are particularly insulted by it either. I don't think that it particularly bothers them one way or the other. Okay, second question from Black Snake Moan 231. I'm new to Wicca, and as I've been studying, I've noticed that some people refer to themselves differently. Some call themselves witches, or Wiccans, or pagans. Is there a significant difference? If I say I'm a witch, does that mean I'm not Wiccan? If I study witchcraft, am I not studying Wiccanism or paganism? Please help! ! Well, different people like to be called different things, and different people use different terms when referring to themselves. And again, I think it's important that if you're talking to somebody that you ask them just what they mean by that, or ask them to at least tell me more. I'm not quite getting you there. That way you're putting the stupid off on yourself. I'm not hearing you, rather than you're not speaking clearly. Okay, anyhow, witch. The way that I use the word witch is to describe a magic user, somebody who practices the craft of witchcraft. It's a collection of spells and magical practices. It's not necessarily a religion. I know that there are others that use the word differently. Most of the Mexican witches that I know, most of the brujo and brujas that I know, are Roman Catholic. And it's not just in a sort of go to church every once in a while sort of thing. Many of them go regularly and believe and take part in the sacraments at church, but they also practice what I would call magic, and some of them don't call it that, and some of them do call it that, and so forth. Talking with one of my YouTube friends from Colombia and about the witches there, and he said, well, most of them are Christian. And so I understand what he means. These are people, the Christian religion, who practice magic, folk magic, witchcraft. So you can be a witch, you can practice witchcraft without or with practicing any sort of religion or no religion at all. You can be an atheist witch, you can be a Satanist witch, you can be a Christian witch, you can be a pagan witch, and there's all sorts of different pagan. I think that I kind of defined paganism in the first question, but let me go ahead and define it specifically as I use the word. Pagan refers to the pre-Christian religions of Western Europe, and to those modern folks like myself who attempt to in some way recreate those religions. They are generally polytheistic and or pantheistic. There is a mythology, there are rituals connected with the myths, there's a worship of the god and goddess, or gods and goddesses, through nature. So there's a lot of deep ecology involved. I think that paganism is probably the broader religious term. Like I said, you can be a witch without being pagan, but if you're pagan, you probably do practice magic, at least to some extent. Now, my own particular path, I do works of magic, but that's not the main focus of it or the main thing that I do. So I don't personally call myself a witch, though I guess I am and somebody else might. Okay, within paganism, there are various paths or traditions, and probably the largest one these days is Wicca. Wicca comes in a lot of varieties, and this is kind of getting into the third question, from Jasmine ESMI, I've heard a lot of people saying that you can't call yourself a Wiccan unless you're in a coven or have been initiated into a coven by a priest or priestess. What's your view on it? Well, originally, Wicca, as Gerald Gardner conceived it, was coven-based. The coven would be led by a priest and priestess, and there was an initiation process of coming into the coven. An interview process by which you decided this was something you wanted to look into, and they decided that they were willing to let you look into their covenant, and so you dedicated yourself, and that went on for a year and a day, and at the end of it, if it was agreeable with both, then you were initiated as a first-degree Wiccan. This is still practiced primarily in the United Kingdom, not so much in the U.S., in Gardnerian Wicca. Fairly early on, there were a few folks that broke away from Gerald Gardner and started their own coven-based Wicca. Alex Sanders was probably the most well-known. So if we're going to use the word in the original context, then yes, Wicca is something coven-based and something that you have to be initiated into by a high priest or priestess. I think since then the word usage has changed, and I'm one that believes that words and vocabulary definitions are flexible, they're fluid. The English language is not Latin or Esperanto, where everything is fixed and doesn't change. It's a changing language. There's new words, new uses of words invented all the time. And that's what makes English a living language. Raymond Buckland was among the first that brought Wicca out of the coven, and he did this in the United States. So probably most people who are from some sort of Wiccan-based paganism are solitaries, are not connected with a coven. Raymond Buckland felt like that a person could self-initiate. I mean, really, when you think back, who initiated the first witch? Gardner said that Dorothy Clutterbuck initiated him in the New Forest Coven. Well, who initiated her? And does this go back to the Paleolithic times or what? Who knows? So Buckland wrote some books. His Big Blue Book is one of them. Witchcraft Today, I think, was not his, but it was one of the earlier books. And so people started reading his books, and those that it resonated with did self-dedication, self-initiation ceremonies. Some of them formed their own small groups, some as more of a coven, some as a grove or a study group. So, as it's used today, the word Wiccan, Wicca or Wiccan, I think encompasses both the British traditional Wicca, Gardnerian, Alexandrian, and so forth, and the more modern Neo-Wiccan, eclectic Wiccan. I know that there's some people that get all upset and disagree with me on the word usage, so I'm usually careful to describe myself not as Wiccan, but as Wiccan-based, because most of what I do in my path was borrowed or stolen from Wicca and adapted and changed. So I don't pretend to be an initiated traditional Wiccan. And on the other hand, I don't pretend that what I'm doing is totally independent of what Gardner and Dorian Valiente came up with back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s and called Wicca. Okay, let me look back over the list and see if I've left out anything. It's okay to be pagan, the gods aren't going to be mad, and in my estimation, pagan is the broader term. Most pagans are witches, whether we call ourselves that or not, but there are a lot of witches that aren't pagan, that practice some other religion. I think it's perfectly okay if you're following an eclectic, Wiccan-based path to call yourself Wiccan. If you get into some argument about it, then clarify, explain what you meant by that. And if they're adamant that Wiccan only applies to coven-based initiated paths, then I'd go ahead and say, well, okay, sure, if that's what you mean by it, well, then that's fine with me. I am what I am. So on that sort of Popeye-related note, I'll end this video, and until next week, Dancing Rabbit, I wish you and yours peace.